All right. In the morning, citizens, the last Thursday of the month. So that must mean it's time for another customer success webinar. Coming at you from the shadow of Cheyenne Mountain in the setting of 1983 cinematic Marvel War Games, where my 8-year-old will happily tell you that the only winning move is not to play. I'm Will Stroh, Principal Customer Success Engineer here at Qumulo. Joining me as always in manning up the Q&A room is the WOPR to my BRGR, cutting his teeth on an old IMSAI 8080. It's Adolfo Campos. Be sure to give him a shout out in the Q&A room if you see him out there. And by all means, be sure to shoot some Q&As out our way. Today we are discussing node down situations. Some folks call them cluster down, some call them node offline. Don't call them late for dinner, that sort of thing. At the end of the day, every case is going to be unique. So we're going to walk through how to get a feel for the state of the node and the state of the cluster by virtue of that. And based off that, it will really determine where you go next. So, if you're coming here expecting to see, okay, I just got to run these 3 commands and my node comes back online, maybe that'll happen in some cases. I was dealing with some cats the other day that, we just needed to restart QFSD and bingo bang, everything was happy again. So, not to say that can't happen, but it is so seldom and rare. So, what we'll be focusing on here is more of a how do we get to where we need to go ultimately. I will say, if you want to stick around to the end, it is going to be story time with Stroh, and there's going to be some other ones interspersed through here. So feel free to, or you can just hang out or leave now and come back in 20 minutes and show up for that. It'll be great. All righty, diving right in. Maybe. There we go. So first and foremost, node offline, what the heck are we going to do here? So a couple of different things here. One, what has changed? We have in our internal CS Slack, one of the channel descriptions is what changed, because you got something that was up, presumably, now it's not. What happened out there? Did we lose power? Was it a networking issue? Did it just decide to up and die? All of those things happen. It's completely legitimate. And so, given that, it does become a question of what changed out here and what put us in this state where we're at right now. Now, that's going to roll straight into my second point up there. Is it offline or is it unreachable? Now, in the eyes of your end users, this is pure semantics. If Cindy from Home Health can't access the cluster, it doesn't matter to her if it's a node offline and she happens to be going to a specific node, or if the whole cluster is unreachable. But it is a key point here for where we're going. It does seem like semantics, but if we had a nickel for every time that someone said a node was offline and your entire network infrastructure was out, I'd at least have a couple dollars on my hands. So it's important to keep that in mind. This goes down to our last point up here. Is it a single node or multiple nodes? If it is strictly a single node, then yes, at that point we can address it as a single node. If you have a series of nodes going offline, say node 4, node 3, node 2, node 1, in succession there, odds are it's not a cluster specific issue. At that point, you're really focusing on something infrastructure related. I remember at my very first quote unquote real job out of college, working for a very large storage company, we had an SE call in one day, and they were on site with a customer they just sold this cluster to, and they see him in the hallway, and they're like, "Hey, how's the cluster working out?" The guy and the admin said, "It's smoking," and the SE thought this was great. So he says, "Oh, cool, we're moving data around really fast." No, the chassis was literally smoking. Something had shorted out there and let the magic smoke loose. So, hardware being hardware, those things happen. And in the case of a single node going offline, while it's very rare that the magic smoke comes out, that's not to say it cannot take place. And as such, we simply address that as, as luck of the draw at that point. Go buy a lottery ticket that day because you know what? You're going to be getting lucky. All right, moving along. See if I can find my mouse. There we go. All right. So as we said, single node offline. The question comes down to, ever since we introduced containers back in, I want to say it was 332. Ever since we introduced containers, now the question comes down to, is it the actual node or is it simply the container? Likewise, what's the state of my cluster out there? And lastly, we do throw that question of rebooting things. More often than not, customers are more than happy just to simply reboot a node and get it back up and running. Couple ramifications come into play with that. One, everything on the cluster is going to be sitting in an in-state memory. There are a few things, I'll take back that everything. There are a few things such as hardware errors and whatnot. Those will write off to syslog or the dmessage file. But anything else, you're going to be sitting there in in-state. So if you reboot the node, odds are any sort of RCA is going to get tossed out the window. We can still try on it. No guarantees, though. But if we do just go straight to rebooting things, it becomes a problematic issue if we need to find out what went wrong here. Now, the other thing to keep in mind going off of that reboot is, can we handle a reboot? If you guys want to log into any of your clusters at home, you can run this command, sudo qq protection status get, and that will show you exactly what you can handle out there. So in this case, I have remaining drive. Whoa, let's go back one. How do I go back? There we go. Don't click on the screen, Will. I have remaining drive failures of 3, and I have remaining node failures of 1. If this node were actually offline, that remaining node failures are going to be a big fat goose egg 0. If you're in that situation, obviously if you have a single node offline, sure, you can reboot that node all day. It'll be fine. But should you encounter something else where another node were to go offline, or if you happen to not have your ILO IP set up correctly, not that ever happens, and hit the wrong node, suddenly your cluster is going to be down because you're in a state where you have 2 nodes offline at that point. So it is something just to double check and see where you're at here. And we'll pop into a cluster and kill off QFSD in the container and see where things go here in a few. All right. The other thing to keep in mind here, or we say we're node offline versus container offline, and then also what's my cluster state. So the cluster state you can always get out of quorum details. It is a QQ internal command, so you do have to go in through the QSH shell for that guy. But this will tell you a whole bunch of information, but at the tail end of it, last 4 lines, it'll tell you the last time we abandoned quorum, the last time we made quorum active, and my current state. And again, we'll pop into an actual cluster here shortly and take a look at this in live action and see where things go. What the key point here to keep in mind is I have this last abandon time and last active time. This is all going to be in UTC, so it's going to be cluster time. So you can just run a date command and see how that factors into where you're at presently. But if in this case here, my last active time is, what was that, 9 seconds after my last abandon time. So I went in here and I bounced this node out is what happened in this case. But if you're looking at your actual cluster, these values ideally are going to be very far apart. The only time you should really abandon quorum is on a drive failure, drive entry, node offline, node online event, or if you actually powered back on the cluster as a whole. Those are really the only times you want to see a quorum abandon there take place. So if you are seeing those outside of that, then something is amiss. Be that a node coming online, offline, be that maybe you had a whole bunch of drive failures take place. If you're in a situation with a controller module that controls a set of disks on your hardware platform, maybe that controller went out to lunch. And as such, you end up losing 12, 24 disks at a time there. Those things happen. And it's really a case of, are we seeing this abandoning be a common thing? Is it constantly hitting us? Or is it just a one and done sort of thing that you'd expect to see with, say, a drive failure? So that's one bit of important detail that we'll want to take a look at when we are investigating these situations where we have a node offline there. So actually, you know what? Let's pause here and go over here, and let's actually take a look at one in live action. So I'm going to hop over to, this is a sim, so it is an OVA. If you guys want an OVA for your own testing purposes, reach out to us, let us know. We're happy to give them out, not a problem. Likewise, you can certainly spin up a C&Q cluster off of Nexus and do the exact same stuff here. It's nothing magical that we're looking into. So we are going to be in the container right off the bat, just so we have a full set of commands to run with. And we're going to, oops, I don't need sudo here. We'll go ahead and take a look at quorum details out here. Alrighty. So let's just dissect this guy. If you're at the network one, we went through this early on there, but we'll go ahead and go through it again in case you weren't. I have all nodes. So this is what I expect to see. I expect to see 5 nodes in this cluster, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Your numbers may differ. I have in nodes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 again. These are the nodes that are in quorum at this point. I have this is degraded field. We're set to false. Are we full? Yes, we're set to true. I have a leader node. It happens to be node 1. Typically, this will be your lowest numbered node. If you've done something like a TPR, that number will certainly change, but it will still be the lowest numbered node typically. Local node is the node I'm running on, and we are the leader in this case. Key point here, out nodes. I don't have anything in that JSON. Here's cluster ID if you really wanted it. And then I have this abandon time and quorum status active time. In this case, my abandon time is set to the Unix epoch time because it was a system boot event. So that's what took place there. For grins, let's go ahead and kill off QFSD here. I know we said you can do these things on your own cluster if you're playing along at home. Don't do this on your production clusters right now because that would probably be a bad thing. So what we'll do, we'll take a look at the Qumulo QFSD process. We're sitting here, we're running active, life looks good out here. So what we'll do is just go ahead and stop this guy. Alrighty. Take another look at status. It is inactive. Great. So let's go ahead and rerun our quorum details. OMG, it does not work. So because we're out of quorum, we can no longer run any of these QQ commands. But what we'll do is copy that guy, hop over to node 2 here, also hanging out in the container. We'll go ahead and drop this guy in here. Now let's take a look at our quorum details. So in this case, again, all nodes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In nodes, only 2, 3, 4, 5. Our out node is node number 1. We now have this last abandoned reason. We told us to abort from node 1. You'll note our leader node is now node 2. And here's our last abandon time and an active time out there. And if we run the date command, it should tell us something similar. I don't know why they said, let's go from 1500, nice military time up here, down to 03 p.m. It's very distracting. But here or there, my pet peeves aside, we know this took place at 3:50, or we know we're currently at 3:15:38. If we go through here, our last active time was 58. That's a little oddball there because our last abandon was this time. That's probably confused on itself. That's a little bit better looking. And so at this point, we effectively have a node offline. Now, those floating IPs, if I had floating IPs, again, this is my sim, so I don't have floating IPs on here, those floating IPs would roll over to the other existing nodes, and everything would be hunky-dory out there. Customers would still be able to access your data. The only ones that wouldn't is if they were, for whatever reason, mapped or exported directly to the cluster or directly to the node in question, which would be node 1 at this point. Again, no one should be using the persistent IPs for data traffic. So that gives us a little rundown of where we're at there. Now, if we were to go over here on node 2, and let's do our QQ protection status get. So as you see here, we have remaining drive failures down to 1 and remaining node failures set to 0 at this point. Now, if I were to take node 2 offline, if I were to just pop over here and kill off QFSD, cluster's going down at that point. You will not lose data per se, but you will certainly lose data access. And I guess that's another key thing to keep in mind is just because you have a node offline, it does not by any stretch mean you have data at risk of forever being gone. You know, obviously, if it's a case where there's a fire in my data center, the halon went off, something like that, okay, that's a different conversation to have. And you know, we can discuss having a offsite backup at that point or a replication target. But by and large, simply having a node offline, all that means is that node can't join quorum. That's really all it means. So it's super easy to get to the point where my end goal is I just need to get node to join quorum. It's great. Now that may be a long drawn out process, but the end goal itself is very super easy to see. Get the node back up. So before we forget or anything, let's go ahead and pull this guy back up online. We'll see how he's doing. Now, if you immediately run a command after that, in this case, we lucked out. Actually, here, this is actually very good. So we lucked out in the sense that we had joined quorum, our in nodes equal or all nodes, but quorum status is stopped, meaning it's restarting that quorum at this point. So then you'd come back here, rerun this guy again, and boom, we're back to quorum status active. Our abandon time, again, 1970, because as far as this node is concerned, it didn't have anything going on in there. Let's take a look over at this guy and see if that changed. Ideally, it has. There we go. So our last abandon was when that node 1 was coming back in, and then we came back into an active state when we went from quorum status stopped. There's actually a couple states in there. It'd be quorum status pause and then quorum status active. We caught the stopped and the active one in this case. Now, again, if we are focusing on a node down scenario, and let's just say it's a single node at this point, the first thing you really want to do out there is go ahead and see what is going on with that node. And so the ways you can go about doing that, as you saw here, we lost our container, but we still had SSH access over this guy. And so by virtue of that, yes, you don't have QQ commands, but you'd still have, and here we can even kill it off just so we can prove this works. Let's go ahead and kill that guy off. But if you still pop over to history, you still have full access to the log directory out here. You know, so we have syslog. We can see what's going on out here. Woo, whole bunch of things. And if you are really bored, you can start browsing your syslog and get a feel for how things actually work out here. A lot of this stuff, like these RPC disconnects, this is just us saying, hey, we're leaving you node 3, node 4, node 5. We're not going to talk to you anymore. And so you can go through here and take a look, see what's going on. I will say syslog is one of those things that we are going to be looking for. Ideally from the node that's offline, but if that node is hard offline, since it's not coming back to life, well, that's probably a pretty easy fix, actually. It's get a new node out to you. But certainly from the other nodes, we can take a look at syslog there as well and see what's going on over on those guys. So let me go ahead and start this guy back up just so I don't forget about it. And then in 3 days' time, I'll wonder what happened to my cluster. right. Let's go over here again. Where'd we go? There we go. All right, so we took a look at quorum details there, and that's going to give us state of the cluster itself. Here we're taking a look at the state of the node. Again, we want QFSD to be running, and it's got to be in that active state. Now, one thing I will say, I know we just hopped over here. Let me hop out again. Is since we've added the container, you do actually have to check that from the container state. If you're not in the container, you can still run this status Qumulo QFSD, and it's going to say something like not found. And you're like, oh, that stinks. What did I do wrong? Well, really all you did wrong, you just got to hop in the container for it at that point. And then rerun that command, wherever status is here. There we go. And you'll want to see that running active. Now, because this is a Linux system, it's a big Ubuntu box on the shady underbelly, you are at the whim of Linux itself, in that if this process tries to run too fast and fails too fast, I think it's after 3 attempts, it'll actually pause out there and say, hold up, you got something else going on. This customer I was dealing with earlier in the week, it was a situation there where Qumulo QFSD would start, fail out, core, start again, core, start again, core, and then it got to a state where this would say inactive up here, and you actually have to go in there and reset the failed marker at that point to tell it to go ahead and move forward. That is straight up Linux at that point. There's nothing magical Qumulo about that, but it is something to keep in mind if you are seeing weird issues out here. All right, let's pop back over here. Okay. So again, we went through looking at QFSD. We looked at the out nodes out here. Other things you can do to take a look at the state of a node is looking at the hardware level. So there's 2 things in play, right? You can have a hardware issue that's keeping the node offline, or a software issue. And in the hardware side of things, I'll lump in there anything infrastructure related. So when customer X goes off to update their SPP on their HPE box, that will send us multiple alerts internally that says, hey, this node went offline. If they were to recuse it, which you tend to do when you're doing SPP updates, we'll also get another alert for, oh, the node just got recused. And then it's up to us to reach out to the customer and say, hey, we just saw this alert come over, everything cool over there? And they'll be like, yep, we're doing good. So when you have a situation such as a power outage or something like that, we're going to get hammered with a whole bunch of alerts. So on one hand, it's great. On the other hand, when it happens at 3 in the morning and wakes you up, that's a little annoying, but that's okay. And you guys will also see them if you're signed up for alerting through Nexus. That'll kick off those alerts for that as well. If it is something that's not infrastructure related, though, then you can come down here to the node itself. And again, presuming you have SSH access into the node, you can run through some commands out here to see what's going on. Now, as luck would have it, I just so happened to randomly pop on a node in our lab that's not in a happy camper. So it works out great. You can't run those commands on OVAs because they have no concept of that hardware layer there. But if you have an actual node, you can run these. These are non-disruptive commands. They're simply querying things out there. So what we're going to do is look at the event log on the IPMI. And real quick, you'll see what we have a problem here. Holy smokies. We got a whole bunch of memory errors out here. Now, the funny thing is, this used to go back into like 2024. I cleared this out the other day just to make it go a little bit faster. But we have dim B1 out here. He's throwing correctable errors. Now, is this a bad thing? If I saw this on any of your clusters, we'd be having a talk real quick and I'd be getting memory going your way. That's just going to happen straight up. Yes, they're correctable, but you shouldn't have this many. I don't even know. Let's see here. WC minus L. Uh, we got 76 of them out here over the past 2 days. Like I said, that should not happen. So in this case, we definitely have a bad dim. It's just pure dumb luck that this hasn't taken down the node yet. Correctable dim errors will not take you down. An uncorrectable dim error will halt the node. And then it's up to, typically folks will just reboot it because you typically don't have a dim on site. But in those cases, because the system runs into that uncorrectable, it's like, hold up, let's pause until the next episode here and see what's going on. So it does put the ball in your half of the court there to say, okay, do we want to boot this thing up or do we want to let it stay offline until we get a dim on site? Totally your call on that one. I will say there are ramifications to both of those, right? If you bring the node back online, maybe you'll never have another uncorrectable again. It is more than likely to. I would say if you hit an uncorrectable, you're more than likely to hit another one. But I have seen cases where someone hit an uncorrectable, they rebooted the node, and it just went on trucking just fine. Again, that's blame it on sunspots, blame it on the rain, blame it on whatever you want, but those things happen. In a case like this, where we see all these correctable ones, system's going to keep running just fine. But you're really playing with fire at that point. So I would highly recommend to go ahead and get this thing swapped out. The other thing we can take a look at is this guy over here. We do a dmessage dash capital T. This pulls up our kernel log. And as you can see, it's just going to town here. It's saying we're correcting these by hardware and require no further action. I would say if it's corrected, then you shouldn't have all these other ones coming down here. But maybe that's just me reading into it too much. So that said, there are times when you will have things in dmessage that don't appear in the SEL list, and vice versa, just depending on how things end up failing out there. We're at the whim of Ubuntu at that point as to why it wants to put one in some place and not in the other. Likewise, you should see these guys over in syslog to some degree. Let's see if we can find them here. I honestly didn't check this. So we're doing live testing here. Let's see here. I think you should be able to get it off dim. Probably need a sudo in there. Let's throw that up there. There we go. So you will be able to see these out in syslog as well. And this will tell you it's dim B1 attached to CPU1. I don't know what type of platform this is off the top of the head. I want to say it's an older like QC208. But in here we are going ahead and decoding that for you. We did have a question out in the Q&A room. What happens if there are two DIMMs failing? Well, then you have a heck of a time on your hands, don't you? Depending on, I guess it's going to depend on which two DIMMs. Let me rephrase it that way, not on how they're failing. If it's a DIMM in node 1 and a DIMM in node 2, honestly, it's perfectly fine. It's not fine, but it's not going to affect you that much. You'll just simply get two DIMMs at that point and move on with life. Obviously, you'd want to take one node down at a time because you do have to unrack the node to get the top off to get the DIMM in. So unless you have a protection state that allows for 3 or 4 nodes offline, which I think is only with like 30 plus node clusters, unless you're in that sort of state, you probably won't want to take more than one node down. Typically, I will say it's rare to see that happen in that situation. And that being said, I absolutely worked with a customer last week where we happened to have two DIMMs going bad. But more often than not, it is a rarity in the sense of they're not interconnected to anything. So if you were to have two go bad on the same motherboard or on the same node in that case, I would almost be inclined to ship a chassis out in that case as opposed to a DIM because you have it almost just my gut tells me that you have something else at play there that's not manifesting in a happy way. Obviously, before you go down that road, you want to take a look at syslog and see, okay, is there anything out here that's also showing these things? Um, it's one of those things where, like I said early on, every down node is going to be a unique experience. So there's not one size fits all answer for that. But if it was two on the same cluster or on the same node, rather, again, I would be inclined to focus on getting a new node out there, quite frankly. All right. So let's go back over here. I think we're at the tail end here. Yeah. So we have some command cliff notes out here. Again, like I said, every incident is going to be unique. So because there's no one size fits all, it's really a data gathering event and then moving forward from there. So, from the data I've gathered, can I tell what's going on here? And in the case of Qumulo branded nodes like Arrow or Supermicro, those, you're not component swapping to the degree of, okay, I need a new CPU in here. There's no AHS logs to collect or anything like that. It's really straight up, it's a node swap. If you are of the HPE camp, well, HPE really likes to do in-depth troubleshooting and just drive for specific parts at that point. And so it may be a case where you have a misbehaving CPU that's taking this node offline, and that's where your problem lies there. And we just need to get a new CPU for you. That's really up to the vendor at that point. The best we can do is get them, here's the data we have. We can make educated guesses off that as to where things need to go and provide that to them. Obviously, you guys are Qumulo customers first. So if you do run into any issues trying to get something out of any specific hardware vendor, by all means, please reach out to your friendly support engineers, and we are happy to use our big outdoor voices to get things rolling there. Again, we'll post all this stuff up on the Reddit page afterwards, but if you want to screen grab it, that's fine too. I said early on that we're going to have a little story time with Stro here. So it occurred to me the other day, and if you're my LinkedIn buddy, if you're not my LinkedIn buddy, you should totally become my LinkedIn buddy. My picture out there, I'm bald and I'm wearing a suit, and I look like I'm giving a talk. And the reality of it is, I was at a Lego convention talking about Lego films. So, it works. So I realized it was about 23 years ago this month, actually, that I started on my customer success journey. And I was sitting in the break room with the head of engineering at a very large storage company. And we were discussing something. It doesn't really matter what, but at the end of it, we ventured into the land of customers and performance and things like that. And he relayed some information to me that at the time, 20 years ago, was very sage advice. And it's really silly advice, but it's very sage advice. And we try and bring that home here at Qumulo when dealing with these situations. And that advice is that, customers, all you guys on the phone here, you guys have entrusted us with your data. Not directly, but you've entrusted us with your data in the sense that you bought Qumulo, you're using that to serve your data. And that data makes you guys money. And when something happens on our stuff that stops you from serving data, you're no longer making money. And so our goal needs to be, how do we get you guys back to making money? And again, when you address these node offline, cluster offline situations, these all come across as Sev 0 or Sev 1 events, depending on if it's a node or a whole cluster. And that's all hands on deck at that point. That's the key point to drive home there is when these take place, you guys again who entrusted us with your money making abilities aren't making money, so let's get you back to doing that. And so that's really the crux of it there. What do we need to get you back up and running? And if that's doing troubleshooting and getting an RC out there after the fact, great, we can go down that road. Just keep in mind, your node may be offline for a little bit longer than we'd like. Likewise, if we just simply need to get back up and running, cool, let's do that, and then we'll try and take a look at things post production there and see where we need to go on that. So with that, I will say, as I mentioned on here, did you know we're on Reddit? We got cute puppy dogs, just my puppy dogs out there, but they are cute ones. And so if you do have any questions or anything, feel free to join us out there. I try and post at least once or twice a week. Typically, it's one-liners from support, little things I think the one I posted yesterday was how do I disable protocols? Super quick and dirty stuff. I know Mandy's out there dropping the Grump Squat corner ones, which are a little bit longer than one-liners typically, and they go a little more in depth. So it's really good places out there to find things. All right. That being said, if I had a mouse, Node offline, out of the picture. Next month, hardware going bad. Show up for it. It'll be the last Thursday, most likely. Although I will say school starts again next month, so hopefully my son's school schedule won't coincide with that. So it may move around, but typically it should be last Thursday. If you have any other questions or concerns or comments, by all means, please feel free to reach out to our channel. If you just want to talk about 1983 war games, that's awesome too. There's things that Barry Corbin would do with the spark plugs, I recall. And if you find yourself playing global thermonuclear war, just remember the only winning move is not to play. All right, folks, take care. If you're running any talking dogs today, be sure to feed them tacos.